I always believed a goodbye was small, a single breath, a moment you could hold between your fingers, a simple exchange, like passing a cup across a table. But the day my father said goodbye, everything I understood about love, responsibility, and identity fell apart in one quiet moment. It didn't roar, it didn't explode, it slipped into my life like a shadow, and by the time I realized it, the world I knew had already changed. It felt ordinary at first, like any other day in a life I thought was predictable. There was no dramatic music in the background, no thunder rolling across the sky, just a man standing in a doorway, carrying a silence that felt heavier than any words he could have spoken. At that moment, I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand what was breaking. That goodbye wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't even clear. It came to me like a breath lost in the wind, so soft it barely reached my ears. But the impact settled into my bones, quiet but permanent. I didn't know then that the quietest moments often make the biggest cracks. No one teaches you that the real turning points in life often look like nothing at all. They don't announce themselves. They don't warn you. They arrive disguised as regular moments, wrapped in routines you think are unbreakable. My father's goodbye was exactly that, an ending hidden inside an ordinary morning. People imagine turning points as cinematic. They imagine slammed doors, shouted words, or life-changing confessions. But mine came wrapped in stillness. There was no fight, no argument, no storm, just a small movement, a man stepping away from a life he had built, without leaving behind a reason I could hold on to. I remember looking at him and feeling something shift, though I couldn't name it. His eyes weren't angry, they weren't even sad. They were empty in a way that terrified me, because emptiness feels like a place no one can return from. That emptiness told me more than his voice ever could. There was a slight tremor in the air between us, a hesitation, a pause that felt too long for comfort, but too short for clarity. And in that pause, something in me tightened, like my heart knew what my mind refused to understand. One small moment, one small gesture, one small goodbye, yet it changed everything. It was as if the ground beneath me shifted just a few inches, so slightly that no one else noticed, but enough to tilt the course of my entire life. When he left the room, nothing seemed different on the surface. The walls were still standing. The furniture didn't move. My mother didn't cry. But something invisible had cracked open inside me, and I didn't even know a fracture had begun. Children feel things adults often overlook. We sense tension before words shape it. We recognize change before it becomes visible. And that day, I felt a door closing that no one else heard. I felt a chapter ending, though the page hadn't even turned yet. The mystery of that goodbye haunted me for years, because no reason was given, no explanation offered, no truth laid out gently in words a child could understand. It was just a silent departure, wrapped in grown-up secrets I wasn't allowed to touch. As time passed, I replayed that moment like a scene from a film, wondering if I missed something, a sign, a signal, a clue. But the truth is, some goodbyes happen long before the physical moment. My father had been leaving in pieces, long before his feet crossed the threshold. But back then, I didn't know. I believed goodbyes were sudden. I believed they were clear. I believed they made sense. His didn't. His was a puzzle without edges, a story with missing pages, a wound without a visible cut. I didn't cry immediately. The shock was too quiet, too confusing. The human heart doesn't always break loudly. Sometimes it sinks slowly, 1 inch at a time, until you realize you've been drowning without water. The quietness unsettled me most. Loud pain is easier to grasp, but silent pain is slippery. It sinks deep, settling in places you can't reach. And that day marked the beginning of a silence that wrapped itself around my childhood like a second skin. It wasn't just him walking out the door. It was the collapse of everything I thought was certain. A goodbye that looked simple, but carried the weight of years of unspoken truths. A goodbye that uprooted questions I wasn't old enough to ask. People assume children forget. They assume young hearts heal fast, as if pain respects age. But memories don't fade just because you grow taller. Pain doesn't shrink just because you learn bigger words. I carried that moment into every version of myself that followed. For years, I tried to pretend it didn't matter. I tried to believe that I had moved on. But something inside me always circled back to that doorway, replaying his last glance, his last breath, his last step away from us. I didn't know then that the real story wasn't about the goodbye itself. The real story was everything that came after the silence, the confusion, the questions that grew faster than I could answer them. Goodbyes create space, empty space, space where fear grows, where doubts settle, where imagination twists itself into knots trying to fill the void. I filled that space with stories I invented just to feel less abandoned. As I grew older, the questions grew sharper. Why did he leave? Why didn't he explain? Why wasn't I enough to make him stay? That's the cruelest part of childhood goodbyes. You absorb blame that was never yours to carry. The years turned the quiet goodbye into a loud ache. Every family gathering, every celebration, every empty chair reminded me of the moment everything changed. His absence became a presence, a constant, uninvited guest in my life. But in that ache, something else grew strength I didn't recognize yet. A resilience born from loss. A determination shaped by confusion. I didn't know then that the pain would one day teach me how to stand stronger than I ever thought possible. The simplicity of his goodbye made it even more haunting. Because when something ends with chaos, you can point to the chaos. But when it ends with silence, you spend years searching for the sound that wasn't there. The world moved on around me. School, friends, routine all continued as if nothing had happened. But inside, I carried a moment frozen in time. A moment that refused to dissolve, no matter how many years passed. I learned early that emotional earthquakes don't always start with tremors. Sometimes they start with a whisper so subtle that no one else feels it until the damage has already settled beneath the surface. His departure was the whisper that split my world. Soft, quiet, hidden, but irreversible. And even though I didn't understand the depth of it at the time, that whisper grew louder with every passing year. It echoed in my choices, in my fears, in the relationships I struggled to trust. That single moment created a ripple that touched every chapter of my life. But here's the part no one told me. Sometimes a goodbye doesn't destroy you, it remakes you. Not immediately, not gracefully, but eventually. Because the moment he said goodbye wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of a story I would spend my entire life trying to understand. And this journey into the truth, the pain, the silence, the strength that followed that is the story of how one quiet departure rewrote everything I thought I knew about myself, about family, and about the kind of love that survives even the hardest goodbyes.